Our next panel is a panel discussion. We're going to look at one very particular type of public agency, that's our innovation agencies, and ask how are they evolving to tackle grand challenges. This panel discussion will be moderated by Professor Rainer Katzel, Deputy Director of IPP and Professor of Innovation and Public Governance. Rainer is joined in the room by Anir Chowdhury. Anir is the Policy Advisor of the A2I programme of the ICT Division and the Cabinet Division of the Government of Bangladesh, which is supported by the UNDP. Beside him, we have Dr. Alex Cook, who's the Director of Strategic Delivery and General Manager for the Missions Programme within CSIRO, which is Australia's national science agency. And beside him, we have Dr. Christian Basson, who is the CEO of the Danish Design Centre. And yes, he was also previously the Director of MindLab. Also have Susan Monarez online. Hi, Susan, who is the Deputy Director of the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, or ARPA-H, in the US. So, to hand over to Rainer.
Thank you so much. As you can see, we have sun out, so I obviously have the best connections. So I bring the best weather with me to the panel. How it goes. But anyway, so I think we have around hour and 15 minutes, and this is the last session before the break, so we can network, have a drink, and then we join again at 6 o'clock, I think, for the last session. So, you know, in the morning and in the digital infrastructure session, we talked very much about the bigger ideas and big infrastructure issues. And now we come to the level of organization. So these are the people actually doing a lot of those big things, or trying to implement, trying to figure out how do we actually take this big idea of missions or challenges, and how do we actually start implementing that? So we heard already in the industrial policy session how important today is engagement. So again, your traditional development bank or industrial policy organization is not really big on engagement. So they didn't really talk to citizens that directly, they talk to businesses. So there's obviously something is changing very much. When we talk about digital infrastructure, for instance, we talked again about very much about engagement, directly talking to citizens, and much wider sort of ways of working that innovation agencies now have to deal with. And so that's why I'm really glad that we have kind of some of the more traditional innovation agencies like CSIRO or ARPA-H that are really dealing with the hardcore science questions. But then we have also much newer kids on the block, like digital agencies and design agencies. And ideally, we will have a conversation. What are the skills that you are really starting to use or needing to use in order to tackle and implement missions, to be much more experimental and really find ways to be effective as well. So each of you have around 5 minutes or so to give your sort of viewpoint, and hopefully then we have a different viewpoints and we can learn and then start to have a dialogue with each other. But I would like to give the floor to Susan first, because she's online and she's been probably waiting, and she didn't have the privilege to hear from Kate about our teaching. So Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for letting me participate in today's discussion. This is something that is so critically important to ARPA-H. What you were just talking about in terms of the integration across both customer experience and the technologists, the innovation type investors, the stakeholders, is something that we are building out from day one within ARPA-H, because we fully recognize that science and technology for its own sake doesn't take innovation across the finish line and allow for products to be translated to the customers who ultimately need to benefit from those. And so we've actually taken a step back with ARPA-H, and we are designing our entire organization fit for purpose. And so from the bottom up, we are establishing a customer experience hub and network. We are establishing an investor hub and network, so that we make sure that those two pieces are integrated into all the technological requirements that we're developing through our science and technology in our program. The other layer that we're adding to this is incredible discipline associated with what types of programs we launch. We're fully cognizant that in the US, we have a $4.5 trillion health ecosystem. It is very rich in resources, and yet still not benefiting all who could potentially have improved individual, community, or population wellness. So what we're doing is we are integrating advanced data analytic technologies and capabilities into our program design sector so that we understand the full breadth of the ecosystem. So when we say, hey, we were going to work in this particular S&T development domain or that particular health ecosystem domain, we're benefiting from the richness of information that already exists in that domain, and we pull it together without anticipation. We're the first to ever think about that particular innovative sector. So we build on this pyramid of knowledge, and then we find a unique placement for our program so that we can very judiciously use our resources in the most economical way to achieve the greatest benefit for those populations that we seek to serve. And so by creating a holistic approach with our customers, our investors, our private sector, commercial partners to translate the products to, plus this integration of digital knowledge, technical expertise to accelerate the uniqueness of our placement, we actually think we're going to have the opportunity to take our budget, which in the $4.5 trillion US ecosystem is a drop in the bucket, and actually have an optimal impact using those resources. So I'm going to stop there, but I'm happy to talk much more about our model, our program decision-making portfolio, our extension out into the ecosystem with our customers and our investors, and anything else that might be helpful to all of you in the discussion.
Thanks so much, Susan. And of course, ARPA-H is a sibling of the original TARPA, one of the most famous innovation agencies, and including in the Entrepreneurial State book, where Mariana talks a lot about TARPA. So I wanted to ask you, Susan, how much of the TARPA DNA is in ARPA-H, or are you a completely new organization?
A lot of the DARPA DNA is within our ARPA-H. So our inaugural director, Dr. Renee Wegersden, was actually a DARPA alumni. So she was at DARPA for 10 years and then was in the private sector working in that space. So she has an incredible background within the DARPA ecosystem. We also have several of our inaugural mission office directors coming from DARPA. We've leveraged the technical expertise of some additional DARPA alumni to help us with strategizing on everything from organizational stand-up to optimizing program design and the execution, performer execution pipeline. And so we are integrating the DARPA, the best of DARPA into ARPA-H, but what we fully recognize is that DARPA has a certain constituency. So DARPA is focused on the defense ecosystem, which is narrower than the health ecosystem. So what we think about in ARPA-H is that we have 330 million customers across the US, which is the entirety of our population. And so while we're leveraging the best of DARPA in terms of the innovation, the pushing the boundaries of what's technically feasible, the processes by which we can ensure we have a disciplined approach in program design, and we're layering on to that all of the complexity of the health ecosystem, and that extends the ARPA-H mission well in excess of where DARPA started, which gave us a great foundation, but now we're building out into what does a health ecosystem innovation organization need to look like to meet its requirements.
Thanks, that's great to hear. And I come now to Kristen, to you. I mean, you were one of the original pioneers in terms of bringing design thinking to the core of government activities. I think recently you have argued that we don't need any more labs, we need all the government to be a lab. So yeah, maybe you can speak to that a bit.
Yeah, so thanks very much. And it's, of course, gratifying to see design as a key module in the curriculum for the MPA here, as it should be in any MPA around the world. So speaking from the vantage points of being part of the Danish innovation and business infrastructure on the one side, and then on the other side also having worked quite closely with the Danish Innovation Fund, the more, you could say, traditional innovation agency and others, what do we see? Well, one thing we see is that for us it's made a lot of sense to begin acting in a mission-oriented way, and we've done that since 2020. around green transition, digital, social transition, and now adding the fourth piece, which is really about organizational design and saying what is the organizational transition we need, both more internally in the public sector, but actually in society at large. What could be the DNA of more sustainable, innovative, creative organizations that can unleash all the human creativity we need to address 21st century challenges. Now, as part of the frame for this session is a question of whether innovation agencies are up to the task of designing and running missions, and I would say in many ways they're not. I used to quote an American TV series. It's on Netflix. It's called Stranger Things. It's my teenage daughter thinks it's very cool because it takes place in the 1980s, which apparently was the coolest decade ever, which I didn't recognize when I was living in it, but apparently it's cool now. But in Stranger Things, there's the regular world and there's the upside down world. And the upside down, how many of you have seen Stranger Things, by the way? Just quite a few, more than half. Wow, that's amazing. That's more than average for an audience like this. But Stranger Things is kind of scary in the upside down, right? But mission-oriented innovation in many ways is upside down. It's upside down in terms of how to run innovation. It doesn't start in the present, it starts in the future. It's about mobilizing all resources in society, not competing for funds. It's both top-down and bottom-up at the same time. Governance is more of an investment than it's a cost, and so forth. So there are some things that are quite different. Portfolio approach versus just a project approach as another example. So agencies are struggling, as I see it, with the balance between being in compliance and ensuring compliance with public funds, or being a facilitator, I dare say it, co-creator of missions. So there's a need for help. And so what could that help be? Well, it might be to create new institutional forms, right? I call them third places. In some way, we at the DDC try to be a third place, but we also realize that maybe we have to help ourselves to create new third places. So what does that mean? That means new organizational entities that sit between ecosystem actors in a mission space. It means devising new legal structures, for example, in the form of foundations or associations that can support mission work. It means creating the teams and not least the mission management positions that can drive mission. Someone who gets up every morning and thinks only about one thing, which is the long-term impact and success of the mission, nothing else. It's about establishing governance structures, cycles of learning, data collection, building capacity, identifying capacity needs, identifying new stakeholders to get involved, and so on and so on. And maybe first and foremost, keeping alive, well, invoking and keeping alive a collective imagination of what is the desired future? What is the future we actually want to create? How can we make that come alive with stories, with design artifacts, and so forth? Finally, I would say this kind of third place infrastructure, mission management, what does that entail for existing innovation agencies? Well, I think that in many ways, existing innovation agencies can be the midwives of these types of entities, right? To have co-creation skills that are needed to start, designing these structures, thinking about what KPIs, what measures should they be measured on, and being innovative around that, because otherwise we end up with the usual measurements. And also taking a system-wide portfolio level picture and view of what's going on, and maybe even, dare I say it, start connecting missions, understanding how different mission fields actually connect with each other, different ecosystems connect. These days, I would think even the work of DARPA and the work of APH connect in some ways, because even security and defense might be connected with health. And we just learned with the pandemic that health and security are kind of connected, right? So what would that role be? Anyway, I'm going to end here, but those are some of the ideas around the future of designing organizations for missions.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions, people in the audience who work in those spaces for both Susan and Christian, but we will get back to that. So just working my way closer to myself. So Alex, you work in one of the very kind of traditional, very big R&D, applied R&D public organization, and so, but you have at the same time, you're also at the forefront of implementing missions. So you're very quick out of the block and to do it, and so you have probably quite a lot of experience. So what do you see, how your organization is reacting to and changing, and maybe taking some of the similar lessons from Christian and Susan?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here. And I should say, I think it's midnight in Canberra at the moment,
Thanks for being up, yeah.
so if my body clock shuts down, you'll know why. I was very interested and keen to give some reflections on how CSIRO has done missions, not how you should do missions, but how we've done it in the context that we've been operating. And I speak about this in the context of some major transitions that are taking place in Australia and in CSIRO. So our CEO, Larry Marshall, who personally championed the missions program, finishes on the 30th of June. So we go through a transition of our CEO, full backing of our CSIRO board. We also have a new government that it's got a much more socially democratically oriented approach and to creating different framework conditions to support innovation and intervention into the market. And Assistant Minister Ayres was here this morning, who's travelled across because they're watching some of the work that's taking place around innovation policy from the perspective of establishing an industrial policy in the Australian ecosystem. And the flagship for that is the National Reconstruction Fund, which is a $15 billion investment. And so what I wanted to do is briefly just go through where CSIRO's role in the system is, the approach that we've taken to our STI originated missions. So we are very firmly on one side of the STI trap, and to go through some of the institutional design and decisions that we've made, and some of the bottlenecks and pain points, as Mariana would say. And Christian's already called out a few of these. And so with an eye to thinking about what happens next in the context of that transition that's going on. So really keen to have the conversation there. But so CSIRO, we're an agency that's got 4,000 researchers. We're 100 years old. We are an interesting institution in the Australian ecosystem. We're the largest publicly funded research institution. We have 8 business units who all operate in big verticals. Almost entirely in isolation from each other until we recognised in about 2015 that CSIRO needed to modernise in the context of an increasingly contestable ecosystem in the Australian system. And so we moved the organisation from being more bottom-up driven in terms of the science that we do, that always has an impact focus, but starting to think about being led by a market vision. So what is the vision of the markets within the Australian ecosystem that we want to create? We released a thing which we call the Australian National Outlook, which foreshadowed what the future trends and challenges and threats would be, where a science and technology issue could be brought to bear, and to think about that. And we've got quite a well-oiled machine now in terms of producing technology roadmaps that think about these particular sectors. And so we put that Australian National Outlook out, and we articulated 6 challenges, which are these broad thematic areas that we want to address as an organisation, bringing together those verticals in an environment that would frankly protect them from being pulled apart into individual institutions in a contestable ecosystem. And we very quickly realised we needed to operationalise those challenges, and so the missions construct came along. And so since then we've been grappling on how to embed and institutionalise this missions approach within our own ecosystem. And so we stood up a portfolio of missions. We now have 12 or 13, depending on how you count them. And they start with a seed of science and technology, which is we're beholden to that because we're a public sector innovation agency that's based on doing everything through science and technology. And we've given the individual mission teams and the leaders some seed funding to go and try and crowd in resources from the federal government, from state government departments, and from the private sector. So we started very small, and we're hoping that we would get a snowball effect. And in the process of co-designing the strategy and the narrative with colleagues in the ecosystem, and come up with investable propositions that would then give us a 5 to 7 year period of time to implement these missions. And so we've taken this approach with very broad guardrails and trying to put in rules as we go to try and embed and sediment the approach, learning as we go. Made a huge number of mistakes, but we always get praise when I can say, when we talk about this, the definition of this is the same as it was a month ago. That they love that when they say, oh, there's a definition of missions now that it's repeatable. So that's always quite pleasing. But we've been trying to embed all of that knowledge into some of our institutional learnings and frameworks. And so we've just been working on this, which is we call our missions playbook, which is an attempt to try and articulate how we've worked in developing missions and what the rules and the processes are to try and start to propagate that knowledge. So we're at a point where we've launched 8 missions, which have quite a high degree of political visibility in the Australian domestic system, as diverse as future protein, hydrogen. We've got energy-related missions trying to solve and address the energy transition. And we did all of that in the context of not making any structural changes to our organisation. So we said, let's leave the verticals in place and let's try and experiment. So let's give a very small amount of money to allow the grease and the glue and to knit all of those things together. And we'll empower some mission leads to basically go and build up that snowball piece. And we've learned quite a lot of lessons through that. And one is this, and Rainer mentioned it before, is the resilience piece that's involved in convening missions. And you try and tell a person you've got a 5 to 7 year project to stand up. You have no institutional structures to back you in. Good luck. Some of them are doing it extremely well, but it is extremely personally taxing. And so we're in an environment where I think we're going to have to make a decision about embedding some structural changes that don't stultify the entire organisation around a matrix management approach that will stop everything. So that's kind of where we're at then. And I was going to call out a couple of other bottlenecks, which just to kind of mention for people in the audience that we're seeing, which is, and I think it's the counterpoint of the resilience piece, is there's only so much ambition you can get out of one person. And so we as the missions program office say, this is great, you've got a project of work, what if you could do even more? And we often get that kind of pushback. And so we're trying to figure out how we address that ceiling on ambition. And we're also finding a ceiling on our capability, which is how many actors within our own public sector institutions can deliver on the ambition of those missions. And we need these third agencies that Christian mentioned, I think, to help mobilise that and work across the ecosystem. So that's kind of where we're up to in terms of the agencies, I think, on the cusp of a shift to try and better enable this. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a very interesting point you're at in your journey, definitely. And great to see another missions playbook. There is one by Danish Design Center and there is one by Vinnova, originally written by Dan Hill, who just entered the room as well. Welcome back, Dan. And so it's great to see this experience bubbling up, as it were. But now we come to a very different kind of organization that doesn't really deal with R&D or technology that much, or partially, but you deal with citizens actually, and you're a digital agency and doing one of the greatest, very interesting example of actually bringing a digital agency up very quickly and really being very transformative. So what is your experience in working in this public innovation space?
Thank you, Rainer. Glad to be here. Actually, we heard from 3 very different type of agencies, all in developed countries. So Bangladesh is a developing country, and LDC still. When we started this mission, I would say, of building a digital ecosystem in Bangladesh, we were a very poor LDC. About 16 years ago, about $650 per capita. We've quadrupled that in the last 16 years, but we basically started with nothing, sticks and stones. So I'll give you one example from COVID, how a mission was formed. We needed to track the disease. The first death happened on March 8th in 2020. And that's when the whole government went into high gear, that we need to know where the disease was going. And we had only one PCR lab in a country of 165 million people. So how do you get data? So how do you track? Right, so we formed this WhatsApp group with 7 people, 4 CEOs of telcos, the regulator, the telecom minister, and myself. I was trying to figure out how to form a mission to track the disease. And so I brought in the data scientists from several UK and US universities, but they said that they would need data from the telcos. And we created this syndromic surveillance mechanism in 20 days, working pretty much 7/24 over Zoom, where data was coming in from self-reporting of people to this helpline that we created called 333. The 333 was a system that was already in place to provide information about government services. We repurposed it, and we basically announced it on TV, radio, social media that you self-report your symptoms on an IVR system, and then we use artificial intelligence to actually find out the concentration of the disease. That's how we tracked it for 3 to 4 months while we built the PCR labs in the country. So this was a mission formed on WhatsApp group. So essentially what I call WhatsApp bureaucracy. We basically demonstrated that major decisions can happen without actually sending letters back and forth in bureaucracy. So that was an impossible achieved. So just how mission is formed. But I want to talk about three specific things of capabilities that we have built over the last 16 years. One is we call empathy training. Essentially, it's what Christian, you talked about, design thinking from the perspective of citizens. So we actually borrowed materials, curriculum materials from Nesta, from Stanford Design School, and we customized it to the needs of civil servants in Bangladesh. We trained about 35,000 civil servants, and they produced mini missions, thousands of mini missions. Some have to do with technology, so about half of them used digital technology, half of them did not. Half of them actually simplified service delivery process. So they actually did a journey map of what the citizens go through for the first time in their lives, using tools from business process engineering discipline of US private sector. We customized it again for the needs of our civil servants. And they simplified about 1,000 processes within the government. And over a period of last 12 years or so, actually have been calculating, we saved citizens about $22 billion because they did not have to go to government offices. We delivered about 6 billion services in the last decade or so. So that's one thing, the empathy training. So that actually caught on, and it gives our civil servants a new way of thinking. We also introduced the concept of measuring impact. We just measure across 3 different specific terms, metrics, time, cost, and the number of visits. How much time have we saved people? How much cost, and how many trips were eliminated to government offices? So very simple metric that they can actually measure. The second capability that we have actually introduced is through challenge competitions. Again, challenge competition again was sort of introduced without success for a few years, but then now we are actually figuring out what makes success and what makes failures. Whatever challenge can be endorsed by a government office and can actually be scaled up from the point of the prototype is what we call a success, because unless you scale up, they remain in shelves. We have actually funded 300 challenge competitions so far in the last 10 years, and most of them did not make it into scale. They're all good prototypes, but only a few have made it into scale. Now we're trying to figure out. We're now doing one on pregnancy monitoring because our maternal mortality has plateaued, and we're looking at 2030 goals. And we're actually looking at new innovations. A lot of these innovations are coming from the private sector. A lot of them are coming from civil servants themselves. A lot of them are coming from students. So we're actually incorporating all of those into grand designs. The third thing that I would talk about is a very long-term look at civil service capacity and mental models, which we're calling Civil Service 2041. 2041 is a new target that's set by our Prime Minister to become a developed country. So it became a middle-income country a couple of years ago. We'll go through LDC graduation formally in the next 2 years. But 2041 is the target of our 70th birth of the country's birth, basically, to become a high-income country. And along with that comes a new civil service that has to think about things very differently in the age of AI, in the age of public-private partnership, in the age of many other tectonic shifts that are taking place. And we're trying to introduce this concept that we call govpreneurship, an entrepreneurial government officer. So what does that really mean? And we borrowed some concept from this writer called Dan Pink, who used to be the speechwriter of Al Gore. He's written a couple of books, and he talks about civil service motivation. He says 3 things. He says that there has to be shared purpose, there has to be autonomy to make certain decisions within civil service, going beyond certain rules, breaking rules even in many cases, and some capacity that they have to build up. And to those, we've added 2 other things. One is what we call Lego blocks. So all the innovations that we have created, digital innovations over the last 16 years, they are in the form of, as David would call, digital public infrastructure blocks, so DPI blocks. So you can actually put them together to create new innovations. For instance, what we built for our judiciary within 12 days during COVID, judiciary resisted digitization for many years. So they did not want to digitize court system at all. But when overcrowding in prisons was actually getting worse because we could not do bail hearing, the Chief Justice said, okay, give me virtual bail hearing. So we built it within 12 days because we had those building blocks that we could put together. So these Lego blocks called DPIs are another thing that we're putting in this govpreneurship. And the 5th part of govpreneurship is really public-private partnership. Government has typically in Bangladesh a very strong distaste and fear of the private sector. I think we're trying to bridge that, and I'll maybe talk more about that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Fascinating. Yeah, let's keep this here. So I would like to open the floor for questions and comments, as many of you are working in similar kind of organizations. So it would be great to hear your reflections. And again, it doesn't have to be a question. It can also be a reflection if you have any. Yeah, there you go. Alex.
Hi, Alexander Holt, Scottish Government. Thanks for another great panel. Question I have, and it sort of links in with your govpreneurship, which is brilliant. But also it comes to this question around incentivization of civil servants. And you talk about a new civil servant required for 2041, but how are we going to convince the current senior directors and civil servants that they need to amend the way they conduct the annual reviews, how they do the objective setting, and actually put this in? So, how do you actually create those incentives within public sector? And have you got any top tips about how you create Damascene conversions amongst some of our institutional pillars?
So let's take a few more, and then all of the panelists can pick and choose which of the questions you want to talk to. Anybody else? Is there a question? Oh, yep. Oscar. Oh, a freshly minted PhD.
Yes. Hi, Oscar Volska. I think Christian Basin made a quite a compelling case that we need these third places, these organizations who can integrate the organizations already in the system. But until we get to that point, I'm quite curious how to make current systems work the way they are with the pieces we have in place. So I think this question is for Susan and Alex, and I'm curious about what you're doing to make sure that there's a bridge all the way from invention to innovations for the projects in your portfolios. How are you working together with other public organizations at different positions in the innovation chain, or at different TRL levels or similar frameworks? And also, how do you make sure that they get there are private investors to catch them at the end, if that's even needed? Yeah, thanks.
So if we would have, I think this is streamed online, I think, right? So I don't know whether anybody's watching questions online. Hopefully somebody's checking whether there's a question. But do we have questions in the room? There is. Let's go here first. Gentleman over there. Ben Jacopo.
Thank you very much. Philippe Larue from OECD. When we talk about mission, we often hear the term portfolio, and we understand that you need to consider activities and manage activities not in isolation from each other, but as part of a group that would contribute together to the mission achievement. Do you do that? How do you do that? And what type of capabilities have you tried to formalize both the processes, but also the type of capacity that is needed in your agencies, in your research institutions to do that in those mission portfolio managers? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And let's take Jacopo's question at the end there as well, and then a round of reflections. And we start with you, Susan, soon, so be ready.
Yeah, thanks for the great panel. Jacopo Gronchi, PhD student here at IAPP and policy expert at Demos Helsinki. Harking back to the question that Oscar posed about the island of innovation agencies or innovation midwives and the bridge towards the rest of government, I would like to expand this island bridge metaphor to the role of policy advisors. So I'm, as a PhD candidate and as a policy expert in another think tank, as for example, Christian is doing in DDC or Anir is doing in UNDP, part of a network of organizations that are trying to nurture this broad process of collective learning into thinking the unthinkable or trying something that hasn't been tried out yet or that we haven't grasped yet. And there's a lot of translation that needs to be done into making that imagination tangible enough to support the policymaker. And this translates into toolkits, reports, handbooks, tons and tons of material that is very relevant, has a lot of expertise into, but very rarely then used into practice. And I think it's okay, it is a process of collective learning, but I'm really interested and inquiring right now in my research and work, how could we make it better? How can we learn faster to improve this communication? And therefore, from your perspective as policy makers and managers or policy advisors, what do you think can be improved or do you think is relevant in order to make this connection better?
Cool. Francesca, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a quick question in particular on the challenges that was said. We tried 300 and then, which is great because I mean, you can have a broad view on what works and what doesn't. But my question is, did you use challenges only as the outcome of a product? Like, because you said, or a service, whatever, and then I understand the value is if you manage to go through procurement into scaling and then it becomes a service or a product. But did you try to use the challenge in an organizational learning, maybe into regulation changes or into legal law changes? Because it seems to me that also a lot of it, it's not just products, it's regulatory changes, legal changes, change in regulation that then get things done in a different way in government. So I was curious if you use this methodology in that kind of context. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So we have 5 great questions. I hope you took notes. I certainly didn't. But Susan, floor is yours for a first reaction.
Yeah, so I'll try to answer some of those questions with some collective response. One of the things that we're really anchoring our portfolio in at ARPA-H is data. I mentioned before that we fully recognize where we exist in the health ecosystem on the S&T innovation. Personally, I've been working in health science innovation for almost 30 years now. And I found myself, the longer I served in health innovation, the more I would hear pitches for, here's the greatest, latest new thing that no one has ever thought about. And my personal reflection would be, well, we thought about that about 20 years ago. And, there were limitations in the communication of whatever we developed at that time, or limitations in the deployment of the technology innovation. But it wasn't that no one had thought of that before. And I think where we are now with our organization is we're living in the 21st and a half century, and not having access to and not integrating data and knowledge is almost indefensible for health innovations such as ARPA-H, because so much exists out there across, the U.S. federal government and with our international partners. I mean, what I'm hearing today is amazing work is taking place all over the world associated with innovation in science and technology. And so harnessing that power of the data and the knowledge that's being generated from that is the only way that we can truly continue to innovate. And what we're doing in ARPA-H is putting in place some very disciplined approaches to building out those data competencies and embracing large language models, embracing integration of anticipatory research or anticipatory data analytics to help guide our research decision making, and really introducing that level of precision before we launch into an innovative project, just to make sure that we aren't duplicating effort, that we're optimizing our resources, and we're really pushing into space that has not been occupied previously. I'll touch on the question about how do we work with our other partners to make sure that we are having strong communications associated with what they're doing, what they have done, and what we're doing. Part of it is this structured data approach that we're taking to make sure that we're integrating it into a larger public data commons that all of us can benefit from. But it's also recognizing they have an incredible role to continue to play. So where we are pushing towards innovations that can be translated in 2 to 5 years to a customer base to improve health and wellness. So whether that's a new widget or whether it's a new sort of way of thinking about health and wellness that can be translated to the community level. That is our mission. Our mission is not to do fundamental knowledge development, which so many of our grant making partners across the U.S. government are actually critically important for to continue to drive forward. So our partners at the National Institutes of Health, our partners at the National Science Foundation, they are so instrumental in allowing a fundamental gain of knowledge across so many aspects of science and technology. And for them, that needs to be okay. It needs to be at the forefront of their mission, because that's where the innovations 10, 20, and 30 years are going to come from, is from that knowledge that is gained in those foundational work that they are resourcing. We're uniquely positioned to take and harness all of that knowledge and integrate it into technologies that are specifically designed to get out into the ecosystem in 2 to 5 years. And so that's really the way that we're looking at our mission, making sure that we're leveraging and optimizing data to inform that decision making, so we don't duplicate efforts unnecessarily, and to make sure that we have strong relationships and partners with those agencies that are actually working at a TRL level that is, much less advanced, anywhere from 1 to 5, 1 to 6, and we're taking things that are in the 5 to 6 and beyond, and that's where we're accelerating with our portfolio.
Thank you, Susan. Question?
Right. So I'll try to address the first 4 questions, not the Bangladesh one, because someone else should answer that. So when I was approached to seek the job for directing MindLab, the Danish government's innovation team, I had recently interviewed the person who actually later got to hire me. And the interview I did, which was about public sector innovation back in 2005, she said in the interview, no one ever gets promoted in Danish government for innovation. And then she hired me as director of innovation. And I thought, I'll never get promoted. And I didn't. But I still hung around for 8 years. Now, I do think we have to think about incentives for public servants, as you asked, and think about what kind of career systems and what kind of movements do we see in the civil service, and rebalance it, the balance between stability on the one side and more dynamic skills on the other side. So I think that is a challenge to do that. That also connects to the question around adapting existing government bodies. As long as we can't wait for third places to emerge or to design them, we may need to do something ourselves. And I think innovation agencies and other bodies can think about what are the new organizational roles needed to work in these more mission-oriented ways, working with 21st century complex, wicked challenges. What are the skills we need? Can we do training? Can we do workforce development? What are the leadership skills we need in key positions? And not least, who are the partners, and how do we get better at partnering so that the things that we are not so good at, we actually can partner with others. So for a couple of years at the DDC, we became sort of the mission facilitation partner for the Danish Innovation Fund. So we could bring in what we could do as an independent body, and then they could do what they were best at. So that might be at least intermediary thing you can do. On the portfolio questions, the portfolio question around that kind of thinking, I think it's still quite an emerging discipline in the sense that what are the items in a portfolio? Now, there's a very nice book from 2009 by Jeff Mulgan called The Art of Public Strategy. And that book almost got torn apart when I was at MindLab, because in the middle section, there's like a fold out, or there's just the middle of the book that says tools of government. And tools of government are basically the levers we have available as policymakers to make change happen in society, from the use of brutal force, the heavy-handed side, until a highly soft communication and nudging, right? And that's a whole spectrum of tools of government, including, of course, working with and letting the market or the private sector or civic society do things as well. So in that whole spectrum of levers or interventions, that's, I think, what we need to look at when we talk about portfolios, right? Because a portfolio can actually be anything across that spectrum. And so what's the right mix and what's the right set of interventions that we can make in a particular field, including, as was mentioned, of course, regulation and more hard law. And I think it's early days in seeing that kind of bandwidth in mission work At the DDC, we've created something we call a learning mechanism, which is basically how to take a look at a portfolio and begin to look at the data and look at the metrics and see how we even manage the different activities. But from there to sort of having a more sort of value chain approach, I think there's still some way to go. My colleague Julia, who's here today, you saw earlier, she leads that work on our green transition and can maybe say more about it after the session. Finally, on toolkits, it's true that it can be tempting to do what civil servants do best, which is to analyze something all the way through, and then you codify it, not in a report because that's old school, but the new school thing to do is to create a really, really cool toolkit. And then nothing happens, right? That being said, we see at the DDC, for example, that one of the most downloaded tools we have on our website, and it's quite a bit of traffic, is actually the mission playbook and some of our tools on circular economy design and green transition. So people like toolkits. They may not use them, but they like to download them, certainly. Fun apart, instead of thinking about sort of a linear way of saying you analyze, you write up something, you make it maybe beautiful, there's also a question of more action learning, right? So instead of saying it's analysis leading to a toolkit, it's actually action leading to codification of what works. So we tend to say in our organization that we do three things. We experiment, we learn, and we share, and not necessarily in that order. So it's more like a DNA where you continuously experiment, learn, and share what you're learning along the way. And I think that more sort of integrated approach might be what we need, so that the toolkit in a way becomes an afterthought. We actually done the work already. It's just a way of codifying what it is and making it transparent and shareable for others. And then it's great if they can take it, but probably they need to do their own actions and then create in a way their own toolkits. Like we see, I mean, we have 3-4 playbooks, mission playbooks in the room. I know there are more out there. There's also a nice one from Demos Helsinki, just to mention one. But it's fine because it's just a way to reflect on what we're doing in action. So that would be my response to that one. Thanks.
Sorry for forgetting Demos Helsinki playbook. So there we go.
These are all fantastic questions. I'm not going to answer the last one either. But on the policy capability, so Australia's just gone, I think, to the end of a trend around outsourcing, and we're very heavily moving back to an in-housing process, which I think is very consistent with the trend that's been diagnosed globally. There's a recognition that we need to build the in-house capability around policy evaluation and all of the processes that are going on there. So I think we're at the early stages of being able to identify what the right interventions, whether that's a toolkit or a training course. What I would say from a CSIRO experience is that we benefit greatly from having staff mobility arrangements where our researchers get to go into the government departments and work at the desk next to the policymakers. And it's not actually the desk of the policymaker that is the important spot, it's the corridors and the kitchen. And it's that grey dissemination of knowledge that is really critical, and then the visibility that then propagates throughout the ministries. We see enduring positive impacts from that, because you then get more trust built up, and then the desire for other departments to come and work with us on those particular shared challenges. So in my mind, I think that's the most enduring piece of work that needs to happen. Toolkits, as you say, they're a codification for the historical record. And there's a rigor that goes into the development of them that producers get better outputs, but don't worry if no one reads it. On the third places piece, so to give you an example, our hydrogen industry mission we stood up. It hit a hot button of an area in which Australia needs to facilitate the energy transition. We've got a lot of solar potential. We've got to transition energy intensive companies, and they're looking at hydrogen as that magic solution. The moment we did that, we were overwhelmed by interest from external partners to come and get us to help them. And we very quickly tapped out our capability to actually service those things. And so we've used a few tools as these third places, and I would say they're very interim solutions. So that's establishing a hydrogen researcher network where we facilitate and curate all of the capability that exists in the Australian ecosystem, so that when people do come to us and say, we really need you to help with an electrolysis technology in a remote region, we can say, well, we know so-and-so is an expert in that, or hydrogen standards, so-and-so is an expert. That delivers no benefit to our organisation. except the customer or potential customer doesn't go away and go, well, Cyro just said, go away, we can't help you. So there's a kind of a weird, it's happening at the margin and it's disrupting against everyone's better interests. So we're using those examples as use cases to try and convince government that we need a different model that actually provides the funding to support that work. But so, yeah, it's the language I think we need to crystallise, and that will become a very compelling thing to explain to government. On the portfolio management, that's very new for us, but it's really critical around understanding the interaction effects of the portfolio that you're looking at, because the people that are giving us the money to allocate to support missions are wondering what would happen if they just did it themselves. Like there's a sunk cost there, and they want to understand what's happening, what's the additionality of this whole process. So if there's work that's underway in understanding and articulating portfolio management and the value that it produces, that's of great interest to us. And I think, yeah, they were all the ones, and I'll leave you to answer the other one.
Thank you. So I have to answer the last question. Nobody answered it. Right, it's a great question, Francesca. So we funded a whole bunch of innovation initiatives, challenge funds. But in many cases, we did not have the policy regulation in mind. But recently, as we are scaling up, because the entire focus is on scaling up the successful innovations. And that's where the policy regulation has to come. I mean, without that, you can't scale up. I'll give you a couple of examples. We funded this land record digitization initiative. When we announced that challenge fund, it's a very critical issue in Bangladesh. We have very little land and 170 billion people. We have apparently twice as much land on paper as on land. So that's, I mean, you figure, I mean, it's a complicated situation. So we started digitizing, that failed. So we did this challenge fund competition. 4 land officers proposed 4 different types of approaches. We didn't know which one would succeed, so we funded all of them. And all of them failed. But the interesting thing is that the combination of all the failures and some successes gave us a regulation that then gave us the mega project that succeeded. Another example of electric vehicle. We developed an electric vehicle in partnership with the private sector. It failed, but left a regulation that now is allowing us, because we have a very large number of 3-wheelers, which have been completely under the radar, no regulation for them, safety issues. So that came up at the top. And now we have a regulation for electric vehicle. So in a sense, I'll say that we have been doing regulation in a way that William Easterly says the searcher's approach, not the planner's approach. So we are figuring it out. And I think that's great. I think that's a good approach that we've been doing. So that's, and then the syndromic surveillance that we did during COVID, that gave us rise to a telemedicine system with 4,500 doctors providing free service for 3-4 months during that time. And that gave us the concept of a telemedicine regulation that we did not have. Again, safety issues, e-prescriptions and all of that. So again, these are all regulation and policy issues, legal issues in many cases that have come up through our challenge competitions. The first question on incentives, that is my favorite question actually, because it's the question at the top of my mind. How do you generate incentives? Because doing innovation is risky, and you don't get promoted for it. You may actually get reprimanded for it, and many people have been. So what is the incentive? In the case of Bangladesh, we have been creating artificial incentives. We have created an innovation award by the Prime Minister. So that's an incentive. We have created a sense of pride, so that, and then in some intangible way tying to the career progression, but not in a very tangible way. So these are all very intangible incentive. The only tangible incentive that we've been able to create is something called the annual performance agreement. There is a contract between our cabinet office with all the line ministries. And in that contract, we've been able to codify some of these targets. So codification of digitization, codification of simplification. So we are saying that, okay, you simplify, even if you don't digitize, You simplify, that's a target. You reduce TCV, time cost visit, that's a target. So these are all codification in our annual performance agreement. So that's a mandatory thing that we have been able to do. But what we would like to do going forward in our civil service 2041 approach is to create personal incentives in civil service. So what that would look like, whether it's a bonus, we don't have bonuses in bureaucracy in Bangladesh yet. Whether it would be tangible career progression, we haven't been able to do that because there are severe resistance, because the non-innovators resist this, right? So they don't want innovators to come up. So all sorts of things that we're trying to do. And the last thing I'll just mention on how can we make the process of innovation better. I agree with Christian, the toolkits actually have been adopted. So it's not just downloaded, but in many cases it's adopted because they have been created through practice. So the creators of the toolkits promote it. It's not created by my agency. It's created by hundreds of innovators and governors within civil service who basically codify their experiences into this toolkit, and they've been promoting it. So no, not much download, it's just emailed by those creators, co-creators. Thank you.
Great set of answers. So do we have one or two more quick questions? We are 8 minutes. Oh, I see. Patricia, yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much. Very insightful panel discussion. I actually have a question for Mr. Chowdhury on Bangladesh. Very curious about setting targets and dates for development to happen. I'm curious about that because there's a school of thought that is development a destination, or is it the process or progression that's made? And I come from Nigeria, and we have several development plans over the years, and you always have a situation where you said by certain date we want to be among the top 20 X amount, whatever. So I just want to know from your own perspective, in terms of that 2041, how do you know when you've arrived at that point? And does that necessarily mean that development has occurred, or are you going to be measuring the progress that Bangladesh makes as you achieve different targets that you set?
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Very specifically to Anir. Is there any other questions at this point? Oh, yeah, David.
So maybe just a quick question. I think the thing that's most scarce in most public institutions, Christian, it's very nice to see you again, is the political capital. And so I think often people always kind of say, oh, if we just get more political capital, if we have political capital, then we'll be able to move faster, or we'll be able to overcome this barrier. And I guess I'm kind of curious about, in each of you, what's the experience you've had where you've been able to normalize something to a degree where it no longer requires political capital, and it simply becomes a status quo or an accepted behavior? I'm just curious if you have any successes, and then if what you thought you did or what you thought happened that enabled that to happen.
Great question. I think we close the floor for questions, and we start with you this time and work our way towards.
So target setting. I don't think it's target setting or process. I think it has to be both. In the case of Bangladesh, the targets that our Prime Minister set in 2008 for 2021, because 21 was a political target to become a middle income country, to actually graduate from LDC. We have not graduated yet because COVID set us off by 2 years, but we have become a middle income country. And that was by setting targets. So setting targets for electricity generation, setting targets for employment, setting targets for poverty alleviation, setting targets for even digitization. So digital Bangladesh was a mission, really a mission across the entire government, and then involving private sector and civil society and academia. So I would say that it's target setting, creating a process to get to those targets, measuring those targets every year and publishing that data, and also the people with a shared purpose to get to that. Without the people, I mean, the targets and the process and the measurements will be meaningless. It's really the people that make the difference happen. So it's the people that rally around those targets and become the missionaries in a mission. That's very important.
Give it a shot. So there was the political capital question, which of course is, I mean, I've been asked that so many times. I think that, you know, if one would write a compelling book about it, then you could kind of retire after that. But it's also a very hard one to answer, right? Because ultimately it's about legitimacy. I think it's about whether an institution or organization or a team in a lab, an activity is considered legitimate. And what are the elements of legitimacy in a political or public sector setting, right? Is it hardcore evidence and data, metrics? No, it's not. Because the cynicism in central government is that you can get the data you want to get if you really want to, right? I think in many ways, legitimacy is about what are the stories being told? What's the narrative around a particular institution? Is it something that's doing good work? Is it something that is relevant? It is something that is impactful. It is something that is professional, that is smart, that is high quality, that has political musicality, which we say in Denmark, it resonates. It's they're sensitive to the political needs. So all of those questions kind of mixed together is kind of what generates legitimacy. And so I see two big strategies there, right? One is that in order to exist, you kind of got to have it from the start. But then you can move under the radar. And some organizations tend to stay under the radar to be not very visible for quite a long time. So they don't need political legitimacy because it's just not being questioned. The only problem is that when it gets questioned again, which could be 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, and suddenly people are like, what are these folks doing? Are we paying them? Why are they there? I didn't know they were doing that. Then you might be in trouble, right? But then at least you get some runway. And the other one is to keep fighting for it, right? To stay visible, to keep in different ways navigating the legitimacy and demonstrating value, which is really also about, right, in many ways. And those are two radically different strategies. I can't tell you which one to choose, but I can see a third way, of course, which is that you don't rely on one or few decision makers to give you a license or not, which is maybe why, again, I think that third places might be interesting, because what if you create your legitimacy through a multi-partner, multi-sector approach where you are on a contractual level, given a mandate, and even a governance model over quite a long time. And then there's a recognition that now this body, this entity needs to go do its work. And there are multiple actors that all need to discuss with each other whether you want to take that license to operate away or not. The big risk in government is that in many ways you could just, I mean, I remember when I was running MindLab, I came from consulting, right? I came from the private sector, having spent 10 years in the private sector. And at some point I wished I was back in the market. Because in the market, you have dozens, if not hundreds of customers that can make decisions on whether you should exist or not. But in government, often you only have one. And that's really risky because it's kind of binary, right? Does that one stakeholder like you or don't like you? Are you legitimate or are you not legitimate? So maybe there are three approaches, right? But happy to discuss this over drinks. It's a tough one. Thanks.
Great. I think Aniri wanted to have a 10 seconds.
I'll go last.
Oh, you can go last. Yeah. Susan?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Christian just said. For me, what it comes down to is sort of 4 key pillars that I have adopted since working at another ARPA 15 years ago. And it comes down to partnering, education, outreach, and impact. And to get to move from intensive political oversight and speculation to achieving political capital such that you have some flexibility and a little institutional autonomy, if you need to address all 4 of those almost simultaneously and almost immediately, when being established. So on the partnering side, what I've observed is that some of your best partners can be can turn into some of your strongest critics if there isn't this perception of equitability associated with that partnership. So I talk to you, you talk to me, I share with you, you share with me. I have something that I'm offering you, you have something that I'm offering me, and you see that there's this sort of equitability associated with those partnerships. The education component comes in when you're working in innovation. I think many of the other panelists have also mentioned this, is expectations are extraordinarily high. You're going to cure cancer, you're going to solve all, this challenges of Alzheimer's, you're going to do X, Y, or Z, and you're going to do it in 2 years. And so the education component talks about what is a realistic set of timelines and portfolio approaches for an innovation organization like my own and like others that I've worked in. And I should say that all 4 of these never end. You never actually can walk away from those 4 pillars. So the education continues, and it's a constant drumbeat of outreach to stakeholders to educate them on what you're doing and why you're doing it, and making sure that there is a collective understanding about the mission, its function, and the activities of the organization. The outreach comes from beyond those who you want to educate about the mission. It is constantly looking for those who will reinforce and amplify the good work that you're doing. And so the way I think about that is it starts at a very individual level with key stakeholders, whether they're up in Congress or whether they're in a community someplace in rural America, making sure that you have an outreach component to allow people to feel like they are part of the collective mission of the organization of what you're trying to do. And the last one is the highest bar, and that's impact. One of the reasons that DARPA is so well known and has such high esteem is that it developed several incredibly impactful programs. It launched ARPANET, which is now the internet. It created the foundational elements of GPS. There are sentinel projects and activities that came out of DARPA where they can point to this and say, look at what we did to transform not just the not just the defense ecosystem, but lives of real people all over the world. And one of the things that we fully recognize within ARPA-H is we have to have those same moments. We have to be able to say that we launched this particular program and look what it did for everyday Americans, everyday individuals across the world. And that impact is the highest bar, but it's also so critically important, and it feeds back into the first 3 pillars. And so that's the way I think about earning the political capital that we need to continue to survive, and then gaining that greater autonomy as you go.
Great, Alex.
This may or may not be a coherent thought, but so for CSIRO, CSIRO is Australia's #1 trusted brand. So we've actually tapped out on political capital. So having more of it isn't actually a good thing. And so we walk into the Senate and the Parliament that we're accountable for, and we wonder whether the reforms that we're going to make are going to be attacked by the left or the right. And we're trying to manage an energy transition which will have winners and losers. And so there's an existential threat to us eroding our political capital if we move in the wrong direction based on that. And so it's a constant tension for us. I think my sense is that the missions model gives us the opportunity to use these multi-stakeholder collaboration models. If we can institutionalize them and make them well understood, where you actually co-opt those antagonists to the mutual outcome, so that you don't see a further erosion or a risk of that. It's the only way I can see forward. But yeah, you can start with very little political capital and you'll be in exactly the same position as we are. That would be my answer.
Yeah, Anita.
Yes, the issue of political capital. I think one thing that we realize in Bangladesh is that the political will is extremely important, but how you leverage that, how you operationalize that is to build a culture of innovation within civil service and within society. I think that's so it's really building a culture of innovation. I think like Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can have an innovation strategy, innovation policy, but I see that as more of a checkbox than anything else. It's really a culture of innovation that you want to develop over time through collaboration. Thank you.
Awesome. So we are actually out of time. I think it was a super interesting discussion. So we didn't really have any disagreements, but I think we had a lot of reflections on the journeys all of these organizations you're on. I think it's really fascinating that what we're probably witnessing is the changing DNA of public innovation agency. And I think what we have to figure out, what are the components of that DNA? What is P, what is N, and what is A? I think this is what we are, in your own way, you're sort of trying to figure that out. And so I think it's a very fascinating journey. We are very glad to be part of that journey. So I'm thankful that you shared your thoughts with us today. And so join me in thanking the panel.